Ken sat alone in his small, dimly lit apartment in Lagos, the hum of the ceiling fan providing little relief from the oppressive heat. Outside, the streets were alive with chatter and the distant honking of cars, a constant reminder of the city's relentless pace. His phone buzzed beside him, and he glanced down to see a message from his cousin Taupe. "I have a solution for you, bro. But it's not easy." Ken stared at the message, his heart racing. He knew Taupe had always been full of ideas, often outlandish, but this felt different. With trembling fingers, he typed a simple question. "What solution?" Taupe's response came quickly. "A way to get to America. A marriage of convenience. You'd marry an older woman, and she'd help you secure your visa." Ken sat back, the weight of the idea sinking in. He had been struggling for months to find a way out of Nigeria. The job opportunities were scarce, and the dream of a better life overseas seemed like an unattainable fantasy. But a fake marriage? It was the kind of solution he never thought possible, yet here it was, offered to him on his phone screen. That night, he couldn't sleep. His mind raced through possibilities, doubts, and consequences. Could he really do this? Would he be betraying his family, his culture? But the pull to escape was too strong. A few weeks later, Ken was on a flight to Atlanta. He hadn't met Alice yet, his assigned bride. All he had were the details Taupe had provided: a name, an age, 45, and an address in a quiet suburb. He wondered what she was like. Was she kind? Stern? Desperate, perhaps? He pushed the thoughts aside as the plane landed. Alice was nothing like he imagined. She was tall, confident, her gray hair pulled back into a tight bun, her glasses perched on the edge of her nose. Her American accent was crisp, with a warmth that instantly put Ken at ease, despite the nerves gnawing at him. "Welcome, Ken," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "You must be exhausted. Let's get you settled." As they drove through the streets of Atlanta, Alice explained her life. A successful accountant who had never been married before, she had decided a marriage of convenience was her best option to fulfill her desire to help people. "I've traveled the world," she said with a soft smile. "Nigeria is next on my list." Ken nodded, unsure of what to say. He couldn't deny her kindness, but the pressure of the situation weighed heavily on him. The plan was straightforward at first. Ken would live with Alice for a set period, ensuring their relationship appeared legitimate to immigration authorities. They'd attend events together, host dinners, and generally present a united front. But Alice had her own agenda. "It's not enough to be a fake couple, Ken," she told him one evening after dinner. "We need to get to know each other." "Really know each other?" Ken froze. "You mean, like, meet your families?" Alice's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, Ken. That's exactly what I mean. I want them to see who I am, who we are, before we make this official." Ken felt a lump form in his throat. His family back in Nigeria wouldn't understand something like this. They'd have questions, too many questions. But Alice was insistent, and soon enough, plans were made for a trip to his village. The day Alice met Ken's family, his heart raced. They arrived at the village in the late afternoon, the dusty road leading them to his family's modest compound. His mother, Ada, was the first to come out to greet them, her wrinkled face lighting up with a smile. She was ecstatic to see her son with a visitor from abroad. "Welcome, Alice," she exclaimed, pulling her into a warm embrace. "You've come to see how we live, haven't you? You'll love it here." Ken's stomach tightened. He tried to steer the conversation away from any personal details, but Alice effortlessly engaged everyone, asking about their traditions, sharing stories of her own upbringing, and even attempting to speak in broken Yoruba. The village women adore her. "Where have you been all these years?" one of the older women asked with a laugh, patting Alice's arm affectionately. Ken stood off to the side, watching helplessly. The longer Alice spent with his family, the harder it became to manage the lie. She was warm, genuine, and effortlessly fitting in. And his relatives were beginning to accept her as family. Late one evening, Ken sat by the edge of the village well, the soft glow of the lanterns casting long shadows. Chinedu, his younger brother, sat beside him, watching the water ripple as they spoke in hushed tones. "This isn't going to end well, is it?" Ken murmured. Chinita chuckled. She's already more your wife than you realize, Ken. At this point, we might as well just embrace it. Ken let out a long sigh. He knew Chinita was right. The line between a lie and a reality was blurring, and the truth might soon unravel in a way neither of them expected. Days turned into weeks, and Alice's presence in the village became an undeniable part of their lives. Ken watched helplessly as his family embraced her more and more, as if she were a long-lost relative finally returning home. His mother adored her, constantly asking for her opinion on everything, from cooking methods to the best way to harvest crops. Even his younger siblings, who had been initially skeptical, warmed up to her warmth and openness. Ken, you should bring Alice to the village meetings, his father, Chief Obi, said one evening while sitting by the fire. She speaks well, and her stories are interesting. It makes us proud to see how far she has come. Ken's heart sank. How could he explain to them that Alice wasn't truly part of their culture? That this wasn't about genuine love or commitment? The longer they spent together, the harder it became to keep up the pretense. You don't understand, Ken tried to explain later to Alice, his frustration bubbling over. They're starting to see you as more than just someone helping me get a visa. My family has expectations now, real ones. Alice frowned, her brows furrowed as she considered his words. Ken, this was always more than just a transaction for me. I didn't come here to play a role or fulfill some obligation. I came to experience something real. Your family has been kind to me. Why wouldn't I want to embrace that? But it's not real, Ken whispered, feeling the weight of the lie pressing down on him. You're not supposed to be part of their lives like this. Alice's voice softened. Maybe not in the way you think. But that doesn't mean we can't find something real in the moments we share. You said it yourself, didn't you? That this was about more than just paperwork. Ken fell silent. She was right in a way. The longer they played this charade, the more real things became. And it terrified him. One afternoon, Alice decided to teach the women of the village how to bake cakes and cookies. The small community gathered around, watching as she demonstrated using the ingredients she had brought from America, things they had never seen before. Flour, sugar, even vanilla extract sparked curiosity. This is the secret to my grandmother's chocolate cake, she said, her voice warm and inviting. It's simple, really. You just need a bit of love and a lot of patience. The women followed her instructions, their excitement growing with each step. Ken stood nearby, watching as the baking session became a bonding experience. His mother was glowing, guiding the younger women with Alice's help, teaching them techniques they could never have imagined. They're going to ask for more now, Ken muttered to himself, glancing at his mother and Alice laughing together as they worked. What happens when they start expecting you to stay longer? Alice shrugged, wiping her hands on a towel. Let them ask. I'm here to help, to share what I know. If they want more, that's their decision. Ken stared at her, her words sinking in deeper than he expected. It wasn't just about the fake marriage anymore, it was about something else entirely. That night, Ken lay awake in his small room, staring at the ceiling. The village was quiet, but inside his head, the noise wouldn't stop. He heard his mother's laughter, Alice's voice guiding the women through yet another lesson. The lie felt like a prison, but the connections they were building felt real. Too real. He couldn't shake the thought. What would happen when the truth came out? Would his family forgive him? Would Alice? Or had they all crossed a line that couldn't be undone? The next day, as the sun rose over the village, Ken knew he had to confront Alice. He found her sitting by the riverbank, her legs dangling over the edge, watching the water flow past quietly. Alice, he said softly, sitting beside her. This can't go on like this forever. My family, they're going to ask harder questions soon. We've reached a point where honesty can't be avoided. She nodded slowly, her gaze steady. I've been thinking about that too, Ken. But the truth isn't simple. You know that. It's messy, and it doesn't always come with easy answers. I know, Ken said, his voice heavy. But if we keep this up, we'll lose control. It's only a matter of time before everything falls apart. Alice took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, the wind brushing through her hair. Maybe we don't need to control everything. Maybe some things are meant to happen on their own.
Ken shook his head.
That's not how life works here. In this village, people talk. They'll piece everything together. You'll become more than just a visitor. She turned to face him, her eyes calm but firm. Then let them talk, Ken. Let them see who we are. Maybe they'll understand more than you think. For the first time, Ken felt a glimmer of uncertainty. Could Alice be right? Or was she walking them straight into a storm they couldn't weather? The days continued to pass, and with each interaction, the boundaries between reality and pretense blurred further. Alice's connection with Ken's family deepened, and no one questioned her presence anymore. In fact, they seemed to embrace her as a permanent fixture in their lives, someone who had come to stay, not just a temporary visitor helping with immigration paperwork. Ken knew he had to act fast. The longer Alice stayed, the more his family saw her as part of the community. His younger sister, Nkechi, had started calling her Sister Alice, and the older women sought her advice on everything from marriage rituals to village politics. His father often asked for Alice's thoughts on matters that would usually be decided within the family, subtly giving her an authority no outsider should have. She's becoming too comfortable, Ken confided to Chinedu one evening. They sat by the fire, the flickering shadows casting a tense atmosphere. Maybe because she's supposed to be comfortable, Chinedu said with a shrug. She's been here for weeks now. Your family has already accepted her as part of the family. Ken clenched his fists. That's the problem. They're bonding with her. They treat her like she's one of us. It's not supposed to be like this. But it is, Chinedu pointed out. You knew what this was when you started. You can't just cut her off now. Ken sighed deeply. What happens when they ask why she's not leaving? Why she hasn't gone back to America? Chinedu paused for a moment, a knowing look in his eyes. That's when the real problem starts. But for now, enjoy the peace. Because soon enough, that peace is going to be shattered. Meanwhile, Alice was becoming increasingly involved in village life. She taught English classes to the village children, much to the delight of their parents. She held small workshops on business ideas, helping the women brainstorm ways to generate income through local crafts. Even the elders began to seek her out for advice on modern ways of farming and communication. One evening, Ken's mother gathered the family around a bonfire. The village elders, his siblings, and Alice sat quietly as the flames crackled. They were sharing stories of past generations, their voices woven into the fabric of the night. Alice leaned toward Ken and whispered, "They're really fond of me, aren't they?" Ken didn't answer right away. He couldn't find the words. His mother was laughing at a story Alice had told about life in America, and Ken's younger brother was nodding along, completely invested in her tales. It felt surreal. "I don't know what to say," Ken finally admitted. "You're like one of them now." Alice gave him a soft smile, her eyes holding a glimmer of understanding. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," she said. "Families are messy, complicated. But if we're going to do this, let's try to do it right. Even if it's not how we originally planned." Ken sighed again, running a hand through his hair. Right? Or reckless? One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, Ken's mother handed Alice a bundle of harvested cassava. "You'll learn quickly, Alice," she said with a proud smile. "You're going to be a true daughter of this land." Ken's heart nearly stopped. He froze in his tracks, unsure how to respond. His mother's words echoed in his head, a stark reminder of how deep the attachment had become. "She's not," Ken began, but Alice gently touched his arm. "It's okay," she said softly. "Let her have her moment." "But it's not real," Ken argued under his breath. "It's not how it's supposed to be." Alice shook her head, her expression gentle but firm. "Maybe it's time we redefine what real means." That night, back in his room, Ken couldn't sleep. The village had grown quiet, but his thoughts were anything but. His mind replayed every moment since Alice had arrived, the good, the bad, and the moments in between where reality and deception clashed. Chinedu had been right. The longer Alice stayed, the harder it became to maintain the lie. Yet, a part of him didn't want to admit how much she had impacted the family. The bonds they had formed felt genuine. His mother looked happier, his siblings more confident. And Alice had become a source of guidance for them in ways Ken never expected. Ken's phone buzzed again. It was another message from Taupe. "How's it going, bro? You need anything?" Ken stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He wanted to respond, to tell Taupe that things were spiraling beyond his control. But he couldn't bring himself to send the message. Not yet. Instead, he leaned back against the wall, staring out the small window at the starlit sky. The future seemed uncertain, but one thing was clear. The line between fiction and reality was fading fast. The days turned into weeks, and life in the village had settled into a strange rhythm. Ken's family had fully embraced Alice, and the village had grown accustomed to her presence. Ken found himself caught between two worlds, the world of his family's expectations and the reality of the situation they were living. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, Ken and Alice sat on the front porch of his family's small house. The air was thick with the scent of fresh earth and the distant hum of insects. Silence hung between them, not awkward, but contemplative. "I think they really see me as family now," Alice said quietly, her voice soft but weighted with emotion. "Your mother, your siblings. They've welcomed me like I've been here all along." Ken looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It's not supposed to be like this," he said again, his voice almost a whisper. "I know," Alice replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "But what's done is done. We can't change it overnight." Ken felt a pang in his chest. The truth was, he didn't want to change it overnight. The way his family looked at Alice, filled with warmth and gratitude, was something he had never seen before. She had brought a sense of stability, of possibility, into their lives that he couldn't easily ignore. "You've helped them more than you think," he admitted after a pause. Alice smiled softly. "It wasn't just about helping them, Ken. It was about being here. Truly being here." The following day, Alice and Ken attended a community meeting in the village square. As they sat with the elders and other villagers, Ken could feel the eyes on them. The questions hung in the air, subtle but persistent. "You and Alice seem close," an older man remarked, his voice steady. "Are you sure you'll let her go back to America when the time comes?" Ken's stomach twisted, but he managed a forced smile. "We're friends. She's helping us for now." Another elder nodded, his face thoughtful. "Friendship can grow deeper, you know. Sometimes, family isn't just about blood." Ken's breath hitched. The words echoed in his mind, a subtle hint at something more serious. His carefully constructed boundaries were eroding. That night, back at the house, Ken found Alice sitting outside beneath the stars, a warm blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She patted the spot beside her, and he joined her without hesitation. "I feel like we're living a life neither of us expected," Ken said after a moment of silence. Alice chuckled softly. "Life has a way of surprising you, Ken. And this," she gestured around them, "is no exception. But it's messy," Ken added, his voice weighed with uncertainty. "We've made promises we can't keep." Alice reached out and placed a hand over his. "Maybe the promises aren't meant to be kept in the way we originally thought. Maybe there's something else we're supposed to learn from this." Ken stared at her hand, then at her face. Her words had a strange, comforting truth to them. But deep down, he feared what that truth might cost them both. The following days were filled with small moments of closeness, shared laughter, quiet walks through the village, and heartfelt conversations about life. Ken's family became accustomed to seeing Alice involved in nearly every aspect of their daily lives. She taught the women new recipes, listened to the men's stories around the village square, and even led the children in simple songs during gatherings. But as the bond deepened, so did the risk of their secret unraveling. One evening, after a long day of work, Ken found Alice in the kitchen with his mother, both laughing as they prepared a traditional meal. His mother looked up at him and smiled. "You're lucky, Ken," she said. "Alice is a strong woman. She reminds me of the daughters I never had." Ken's throat tightened. "It's not like that," he managed to say. "She's just here to help." "But helping can become more than that," his mother said softly, her eyes sparkling with pride. You should cherish this, my son. Not many get a second chance at life like this. Ken stepped back, unsure of how to respond. His mother's words had thrown him off balance, and he quickly left the room, leaving Alice to finish the cooking with his mother. Later that night, he found Alice sitting on the porch again, her expression contemplative as she watched the sky. They think it's more than just a temporary arrangement, Ken said quietly, sitting beside her. I know, Alice replied gently. They've invested in us. Emotionally. Whether or not they understand the full truth doesn't change that. Ken let out a heavy breath. What if they never understand? Alice reached out and took his hand in hers. Then we face whatever comes next. Together. Her words lingered in the air, comforting yet terrifying. Ken felt the weight of her presence, steady, supportive, yet a reminder that their story was far from over. The next morning, as the sun rose over the village once more, Ken knew that the clock was ticking. The longer they stayed in this delicate dance of truth and fiction, the harder it would be to disentangle themselves from the web they had woven. And the price of truth might be higher than either of them were ready to pay. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its rays illuminating the familiar yet strange village landscape. Ken sat at the edge of a veranda, staring at the same well-worn dirt path that had led him to this crossroads. His thoughts swirled. Thoughts of his family, Alice, and the future they were both navigating. His mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, guilt, fear, love, and the undeniable truth that things had spiraled beyond his control. Alice stepped out quietly, a basin of water in hand. She sat beside him, her eyes thoughtful as she watched the world go by. You're quiet, she observed softly. Ken sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's hard not to be, he admitted. Everything feels like it's falling apart. I know, Alice said gently. But you don't have to carry this alone. He glanced at her, his expression pained. You don't understand what this means to my family. They've grown attached to you in ways I never expected. And soon, they're going to ask questions we can't ignore anymore. Alice's gaze softened. Maybe they don't need to know everything. Not all at once. But they'll wonder, Ken countered. They'll ask why you haven't left yet. Why you've been here for so long. How do I explain that to them? Alice shifted her position, facing him fully. You don't have to explain. Not if you don't want to. But they already see you differently, Ken. You've become part of their story. And whether you realize it or not, you've changed too. Ken looked away, the weight of her words settling on him. She was right. Things weren't as simple as they had started. Their lives had become intertwined with the lives of his family, and the longer they stayed, the more they blurred the line between reality and fabrication. Days turned into nights, and Ken began avoiding conversations with his family. It wasn't that he didn't want to spend time with them, but every question, every glance, made the truth heavier. Alice noticed his withdrawal, but said nothing, waiting for him to come to her when he was ready. One evening, after a long day of tending to the fields, Ken found Alice sitting quietly by the riverbank. She had a small notebook open in her lap, and her pencil glided across the pages with careful precision. You've been writing again, Ken said, sitting down beside her. Alice looked up with a small smile. It helps me think. About what?
Ken asked, his voice softer this time.
About you, she said simply, tapping the pencil against the edge of the notebook. About us. About where we go from here. Ken's heart tightened at her words. There's no us, he said softly. There's only what we've built here. And I don't know how to keep that going without it falling apart. Alice closed the notebook, placing the pencil neatly on top. Sometimes, the best stories don't have a clear ending. They evolve. They take unexpected turns. But that doesn't mean they're not real. I don't want an evolution where everything breaks, Ken admitted, his voice cracking slightly. I can't watch my family lose everything they've come to believe in. Alice reached out and touched his hand gently. Maybe they won't lose everything. Maybe they'll understand more than you think. Love, real love, doesn't always come in a perfect package. It finds a way, messy as it is. Ken closed his eyes, the warmth of her touch grounding him. This wasn't supposed to be real, he whispered. But it is, Alice said softly, leaning against him slightly. Whether you fight it or not, it's already real. That night, Ken lay awake, the hum of the village outside his window a constant reminder of everything he was trying to keep hidden. The moonlight cast shadows across the room, and the weight of the truth pressed down heavier than ever before. In the early hours of the morning, Ken slipped out of the house, unable to bear the suffocating thoughts anymore. He wandered to the village square, where the morning mist still clung to the ground. The peaceful silence was interrupted only by the distant sounds of birdsong and the rhythmic pounding of someone's footsteps. As he walked, Ken heard a familiar voice call out from behind him. Ken. It was his younger sister, Nkechi, rushing to catch up with him. Her face was bright and full of curiosity. Where are you going so early? Ken stopped, forcing a smile. Just clearing my head. She eyed him suspiciously, but didn't press further. We all do that sometimes, she said with a knowing smile. But you've been away from the house a lot lately. You should come back. We miss you. Ken felt a lump form in his throat. I know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll come back soon. As she walked away, Ken continued his solitary walk through the village, contemplating her words. His family's need for him was undeniable. Yet, the weight of the truth, an undeniable deception, loomed larger than ever. Back at the house, Alice sat quietly, watching the sunrise. She had always been a light in Ken's life, a steady presence through the chaos. Her eyes reflected the promise of a new beginning, even if it wasn't what they had initially envisioned. Ken entered the room silently, standing in the doorway, watching her as she absorbed the moment. You're up early, he said softly, a hint of sadness in his voice. Alice turned to him with a gentle smile. I wanted to watch the sunrise one last time here. Ken stepped closer, his heart aching at the thought of their departure. You don't have to go, he murmured. I do, Alice replied simply. But not in the way we expected. This place will always be a part of me, and so will you. He took her hand, their fingers entwining in a silent farewell. I don't want to lose what we've built. You won't, Alice assured him. The love we've shared is stronger than time or distance. They sat in quiet companionship, the weight of their shared journey pressing on them. Every laugh, every struggle, every moment had become something precious, a tapestry of memories woven into their souls. Days later, as Alice boarded her flight, Ken stood at the airport, the bustling crowd surrounding them. He watched her through the glass, the ache in his chest growing with each passing second. The finality of the moment hit him hard, but he held on to the promise they had made to each other. Back at the house, life slowly resumed its usual rhythm. Ken's family missed her dearly, but her presence had left an indelible mark. They often spoke of her fondly, remembering the moments that had brought them closer together. Ken found comfort in those memories, a reminder of what they had built despite the challenges. Weeks turned into months, and though the distance was vast, their bond remained. Letters and occasional video calls bridged the gap, bringing smiles to both their faces. In those quiet moments, they found solace in knowing that their story wasn't truly over. It had simply evolved into something different. One evening, as Ken sat by the village square, a familiar voice called out to him. It was Alice, standing at the entrance of the village, her suitcase in hand. Her return was unexpected, but it felt like a return to home. You came back, Ken whispered, his voice filled with emotion. I never really left, she said with a smile, stepping into his arms. Part of me will always be here. Together, they watched the sunset, their love stronger than ever. The village, the bond they had created, and the journey they shared were now an eternal part of their lives, a story that would continue to unfold in the tapestry of their hearts. And so, their story, though once built on deception, became a tale of resilience, understanding, and the profound power of love, an unforgettable journey that would be remembered for generations to come. If you enjoyed this heartfelt journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories.